Today, we are going to be bringing you guys the number one strategy in all of Dynasty Fantasy Football, the one-year punt, the productive struggle, rebuilding within a Dynasty startup. Similar to yesterday's video where we talked about the number one contending draft strategy within a startup, we are going to break down 4 rules to follow when you're rebuilding, a couple tips for how to handle each position. Then we're going to go into a mock draft where we kind of build out the shell of a productive struggle of a rebuild. And then after that, we will show you an example of a rebuild that we've recently done, a team that I drafted late in the NFL season last year. So before we get into it, Danny, how you doing?
Doing well, doing well. And yeah, this is the most common build out of a startup that you guys have seen us talk about on this channel, because quite literally, this is the most effective build in our opinion. The one-year punt leaves you in a position where you can accumulate as much value as possible. And by year 2, you are ready to fully compete. And you have a team that, from a value standpoint, is 120% that of the majority of your league. So if you do this correctly and you get these values at the right spots and you build it the right way, accumulate the draft picks the right way, man, I'm telling you, by year 2, your team could be a monster.
Yeah, exactly. But you can make a lot of mistakes along the way. So that's what this video is for. We're going to definitely try and guide you the best we can. But without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, so as I talked about in the intro, we are going to break down 4 rules that you guys need to follow while you're building out a productive struggle, a one-year punt, a rebuild, whatever you want to call it during the startup. Rule number 1 is maintain flexibility as long as possible and understand your league market. So similar to what I said in the how to build a contender video, you don't necessarily want to enter the draft with either strategy, to contend, to rebuild. But generally speaking, you want to be fluid and be flexible based on the information you get from your league. And you can actually write down some stuff or take some notes or think of some things that might be steering you in one direction or the other before the startup even begins. Maybe you know these players. Maybe the Dynasty startup you're about to do is with your redraft buddies. Are you in any leagues previously with them? Do you know what their tendencies are? Does this player value running backs highly? Whatever. Who's everybody's favorite team? Maybe if they follow content, if you met them in like a Discord or something like that, you might understand that if you met them in our Discord, they might be more prone to build a productive struggle than somebody else's Discord, for example. So based on that league dynamic that you're going to kind of outline before the startup actually begins, let's say you've documented that you're in a league with your redraft buddies. It's everybody's first Dynasty startup. You conclude that this market might be conducive to rebuilding because many people will be, more likely to undervalue future picks, highly value running back assets and win now assets. And in that case, you can use this kind of strategy. So this rule is basically what you want to do is evaluate your league market and understand what strategy might be most effective, but you're not going to actually know that until you get into the startup itself. And by round 3, round 4, you should have a good idea. Okay, I see 7 teams are looking to build a productive struggle and only 4 teams are looking to compete. At that point, it might be more effective to compete, vice versa. So unfortunately, you won't actually have that decision made for you until you see how the board actually looks. But it's important to understand that you want to maintain flexibility with your first couple picks. So you want to make your first couple picks usually players that are not going to necessarily sway you in one direction or the other. You don't want to draft Austin Eckler at the 302 because then you're automatically pigeonholed into competing. You usually want to take players that would be good for either or. And usually there's enough players in a Dynasty startup that are both young and can help you compete.
The difference between redraft and Dynasty. In redraft, every single manager in that league has the common goal of accumulating as much production, as much fantasy points in that season as humanly possible. Because at the end of the day, every single person is trying to win that league because it is a one-year sample. It is 1 year, you go guns to the wall, and you try to win your championship. In Dynasty, why we love Dynasty so much is there is so much strategy that you can implement in your drafts. And like Corey said, based on how your league market behaves, you have a league market that is more redraft centric and wants to build a ton of production on their team. You know, your Cooper Kupps, your fucking Devontae Adams, your Saquon Barkley, all these win now type of pieces. They're just smashing them round by round by round by round. If that's a league market that you're in, which in newer Dynasty leagues with more inexperienced players is typically what we see, a productive struggle can turn your team into an absolute juggernaut if done the right way, like I kind of mentioned in the intro. And the reason being is in a more redraft-centric type of room, people view these players, like I said, in terms of exactly what their production represents. But if you do a productive struggle correctly, you view these players as assets. And that's rule number 2, in my opinion, is that you got to think of your team as a bond portfolio that matures in 2 years. Your only goal in the startup, once you declare, yes, I am productive struggling, I don't care about my year one output, I want to maybe potentially tank my pick for Caleb Williams, you keep all of these external factors in your head and you keep getting as much value as possible in your drafts. What do I mean by value? Whether that's trading down, whether that's, taking a young, appreciating wide receiver over an old pigeonhole type of running back, you have to make sure that you build as much potential future value in the next year rather than worrying about just exactly what your starting roster is going to look like on Sundays. Like we kind of mentioned, it's all about building that wealth. It's all about building that foundation. Basically, the rule of thumb here is that you have to take the value when it falls to you. You can't just be saying, oh, I need a running back this round, I need to take a running back. Because, for example, if you're in a draft and in the first 2 picks, you're at the 111, you get Deshaun Watson and you get Justin Fields at the 111, 202 turn. Just because you got those guys doesn't mean that if Kyler Murray falls to you at the 311 because people are worried about that injury hampering his production in 2023, you don't take him. You have to take the value when it falls to you. You have to be flexible and willing to take plunges on players that should not be available at your pick. So overall, keeping it in mind that you're building these players, you're drafting assets, and you have the opportunity to potentially flip them at a later time is how you go about your business. Because ultimately here, you're not drafting to have, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 3 quarterbacks by round 10. You're just taking whatever falls to you, and you're at the mercy of the draft board, like I said.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to what you said. Your team is going to mature in 2 years. You have plenty of time to trade off of those players if you don't need them. If you take a third quarterback highly or a fourth quarterback even, and your league values quarterbacks highly, you're going to be able to trade off of those assets and, kind of dovetail that into your team's final product, which will be like a year and a half, 2 years from now at that point in time. And honestly, sometimes you want to purposely ignore certain positions as well, like we're going to get into with rule number 4. But before we get into that, rule number 3 is that we want to be trading down as much as humanly possible because our goal is to collect a rebuild war chest full of draft capital in 2024 and in 2025 if your league allows you to trade for those.
Yeah, 100%. And this is crucial in my opinion. And this is what separates the advanced dynasty player from the beginner dynasty player, because you'll see if you go to an advanced draft, a lot of people are wheeling and dealing. A lot of people are trading down, trading up. There's a lot of action going on in these leagues. The reason why we trade down is because the offer is simply too much to pass, or B, you could potentially maneuver down and still get a player in a similar tier. If you're able to spot that and be proactive with that, that gives you a little bit of leverage in terms of getting some value. Let's say hypothetically, you're at the 403 and somebody's willing to offer you their 501 and their 2024 second. And you realize, hey, listen, if I stick at the 403, I'm probably taking, fucking Jerry Jeudy, or I'm taking Stephon Diggs, or I'm taking Cooper Kupp. Whereas at the 502, I'm taking, Jordan Addison there. If that's the case and you contextualize it, you basically realize, hey, listen, I'm basically getting offered Jordan Addison in a second for Cooper Kupp, Stephon Diggs, etc., whoever they want to take at the 403. And because I'm not productive in year one, because I don't want to win year one, I don't need the production value of Cooper Kupp. And there's a very, very good chance by this time next year, Jordan Addison is worth more than Cooper Kupp, and I got a free second on top. So being wary and understanding where exactly to pick your pockets and get some value can make your team and make your trades look absolutely phenomenal in a year's time.
Yeah, exactly. Your goal is basically to trust your drafting ability and trust your trading ability and evaluate the tier breaks. Like you said, if you see a tier of 11 straight wide receivers, you don't mind trading down 2 rounds because running backs, quarterbacks, tight ends are going to go within that range as well. And you might get the tail end of that tier versus the high end of that tier and pocket potentially a first round pick. And our goal would be first round picks, but in sharper rooms, that's going to be more difficult. But again, that goes back to the first point, which is you want to evaluate your market, evaluate your room. If you determine that everybody's going to want to go productive struggle and nobody's going to want to compete, then going productive struggle and trying to trade for first round picks is going to be that much more difficult. Ergo, you should probably go with a contending strategy. And yesterday's video would probably be more helpful for you.
In some leagues, I have seen that future first round picks are like equivalent of fourth or fifth round startup picks. We're talking about random first being the equivalent of fourth or fifth round startup picks in sharper rooms because people simply don't want to lose those picks. So if they're willing to trade their future first round pick, they need a top 5 round pick in most instances to be able to deal off of it. Whereas in some rooms, if you're, with your home league buddies or you picked up, a freaking random Reddit league, hypothetically, some of those leagues may value future first round picks in like the 8th or 9th round startup range. And at that point, you see the big disconnect there. The difference is profound because, if we're looking at who goes in the 8th or 9th round versus the 4th or 5th round, the difference in player asset you can take there is huge.
Yeah, exactly. So the final rule, and then we'll get into how to handle each position, and then we'll talk about a mock draft, and then we'll talk about a team that I've built. Rule number 4 is build your team around foundational players. And foundational players are very simple. It's the players that have a longer shelf life. Ergo, don't draft a bunch of running backs. Draft foundational quarterbacks in a super flex or a 1 quarterback league. Even having 1 foundational quarterback is helpful. Wide receivers, of course, have a longer shelf life, and maybe a tight end if it's a secure asset, a stable asset. Because having a 27-year-old quarterback is way different than having a 27-year-old running back. Patrick Mahomes is 27 years old or 28 years old. Deshaun Watson, those type of guys, that's the age range they're in. Versus Nick Chubb and Alvin Kamara, who we would probably say are on the back 9 of their careers at this point in time. The longevity factor of having quarterbacks and wide receivers in a superflex league is what we want to build around in a productive struggle, in a rebuild, because if we view our team as not competitive for at least a year or two, we don't want to have players that won't be fantasy relevant a year or two, which is usually the case with young running backs. Even if they're 25, 26 years old, they're going to be 27, 28 by the time you're ready to compete. And that longevity factor is not there. So the running backs want to be the final piece of the puzzle. We want to drop young running backs into the team once we're ready to make the transition from rebuilding team to maybe house money contender or a legitimate contender if we've drafted and built the thing the right way. In an ideal world, your team is going to mature, again, back to the Bond example, when your wide receivers, quarterbacks, and tight ends are all in their prime years, 25, 26, 27, 28 years old. And your running backs will be on their rookie contracts because you probably drafted them in the last 2 rookie classes.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because at the end of the day here, the opportunity cost of taking running backs early in your startups when you're trying to productive struggle is huge. Because prime example, if you were to, not a lot of people would have taken Jonathan Taylor if they were going into a productive struggle. Let's just say hypothetically, you were transitioning your team and you're selling off your assets, but you weren't sure if you had to sell Jonathan Taylor or if you could just hold him for a year and then try to compete this year. Well, if you held him rather than sold him last year when you knew already you weren't going to compete, his loss of market value has been huge. He went from a back-end first-round pick in Dynasty startups to an early to mid third-round pick in most leagues, in most sharp leagues. So it is pretty apparent that despite what we think of the player himself, despite what we think of, oh, he's only a 23 or 22-year-old running back, surely he can't lose much value from where he is this year. You're always wrong in that instance because running back is such a production-based position that if you're not drafting them based off the production that they can give you, there's really no point on having them on your team. The only caveat I will have in terms of the running back position and the only real archetype I'm willing to roster on teams that are in a productive struggle.
Well, we can transition right now into how to handle each position.
Perfect.
And I'll let you take it away with how you want to handle running back because we've kind of discussed already how you want to handle the other positions. I'll let you just talk about, if you're not drafting running backs highly for the production, what are you doing with running backs?
Yeah, 100%. So, obviously, we've gone through quarterbacks both on this video and in the contending video, but these guys are always going to be highly valued. You guys want to have really, really good quarterbacks. That's pretty much the basis of how we view the quarterback position. But like we were talking about with the running backs, right? You want these guys based off production, or if you're drafting a productive struggle, you want high leverage type of fantasy running backs. What do I mean by that? Your Alexander Madison types, your Damian Harris's, these super, super cheap running backs with real unclear workloads right now, that if they worked into, an 18 touch per game workload at some point in the year, you can easily flip for value plus. Hypothetically, let's say you take Alexander Madison in the 13th round of your startup or 12th round of your startup this year. And at some point in the year, Dalvin Cook is traded, Dalvin Cook is cut, Dalvin Cook is hurt. Right now, his equivalent value is probably about a mid to late second round pick in most leagues. But if anything were to happen to Dalvin Cook, you're looking at a guy that could potentially net upwards of a late first round pick. Maybe you add, Alexander Madison in a late 2. You could potentially get a future 1. So any piece like that I can easily envision a scenario of them accruing a ton of value, like Alexander Madison, I'm willing to take a couple of these guys in my draft. So your Alex Madisons, Jamal Williams, James Conner from a couple years ago was a prime example. These like underappreciated running backs with potential paths to a workload in season are the guys that I'm willing to grab a few of, even if I'm in a productive struggle.
Yeah, and that usually means by round 8 to 10 of your startup, you probably don't have a running back on your team, or maybe you only have one running back on your team, because in those first couple rounds, you would have been grabbing, your longer shelf life positions, your quarterbacks, like you talked about in yesterday's video. We want to have like 1 to 2 of those in the first 2 rounds of our startup, ideally, and definitely 2 by like rounds 3 or 4. In an ideal world. And then wide receivers, they also have a longer shelf life as well. You want to invest in like sub 25-year-old wide receivers that are going to be 25, 26, 27 by the time you're ready to compete for your team. Have 2 to 4 of those by round 10, have a couple quarterbacks by round 10, and then you want to start taking shots on low cost running backs, guys like Damian Harris, guys like AJ Dillon. I also like taking shots on rookie running backs as well, like Tyler Algier before Bijan was drafted there, obviously accumulated a lot in value. Damian Pierce, guys like that this year would be like Roshan Johnson, Tank Bigsby, guys in ambiguous backfield situations that we don't necessarily know exactly what's going to happen. But if they hit, we know that the market favors young, talented players at the running back position, so they could really skyrocket up the rankings like we've seen from Damian Pierce and Ramondre Stevenson, who are both going in that area this time last year.
Yep, 100%. And those were 2 prime examples that were going cheap that you could have gotten a lot of value from. So I like those examples. Ultimately, what you have to remember when you're in these drafts is that the only precursor real difference between the contending and the rebuilding is based off the type of assets that you spend early. Because in a contending window, maybe you throw in a couple productive running backs earlier in your draft because you want to try to win. In a win your punt in a productive struggle type of situation, you're simply not going to be doing that. And the other difference I will say is you don't want to roster, of course, as many high-end running backs, like I said, but you also want to change the archetype that you're potentially targeting, because in a contending type of window, you're more so free to grab your Stephon Diggs types, your Cooper Kupp types, your Devontae Adams types, your Ramondre Stevensons early in your draft. Whereas now, if you're in a productive struggle, you're more so gearing towards your Jerry Jeudy's, Christian Watsons, Jordan Addison's, young guys with potential upside to increase a tier by this time next year.
Yeah, and then at the tight end position, you're obviously going to ignore and use these pieces as leverage in trades as well. If Travis Kelce falls to you, if Mark Andrews falls to you, somebody that is more productive based. And the only tight ends that I'm usually going after are Kyle Pitts, obviously, because he's the premier rebuilding tight end. But I'll also take swings at, upside guys like the rookie tight ends, Kincaid, Mayer, Laporta, those type of dudes. And then Freiermuth, Dulcich, Okonkwo, guys that are going on a little bit later in drafts. The type of tight end core I like to build in a productive struggle is either Kyle Pitts and everybody else, or a couple dart throws like a Freiermuth, Laporta, Tucker Kraft type of 3 tight end build for the future. One of those guys should hit for me, hopefully going into the future, and then I can kind of build out my wide receiver, quarterback, and running back positions as we go. So instead of talking about examples, instead of going through hypothetical situations, we'll actually show you kind of what it looks like to build a rebuilding productive struggle shell within a startup. Of course, we can't actually trade down in a startup in this format, but I think this should be a good exercise nonetheless. So we'll get into that right now. All right, so we're now into the draft. You guys can see we're doing basically a startup mock draft, and we're going to show you kind of the productive struggle mindset. Now, I don't think Jalen Hurts would be going 1-1, but I've seen crazier things. So I'm going to take a quarterback who's still young, who can still obviously give me production and maintain that flexibility, back to that rule that we were talking about early on. There's at no point in this draft am I going to determine I'm going productive struggle or contending until I have some information, until I see how the board looks. And, it's 2 to 3 rounds deep. I can decide at that point in time, everybody's going contending, everybody's going, productive struggle. Then I make my decision at that point in time.
Yep, 100%. So overall, I'm on the board here. Don't disregard the actual order some of these guys go. Like typically Josh Allen's not going to be falling to your 106, but I mean, those players make a lot of sense. Obviously, CD Lamb's probably the real only outlier, but Lamar Jackson, Trevor Lawrence, Josh Allen, Jamar Chase, etc., they're all going to be going within the first few picks of your draft. So I'm on the clock here, 111. Justin Fields here, young quarterback. You can consider, Bijan Robinson, AJ Brown if you're a contending type of build, but like we kind of mentioned, you want your young quarterbacks to be the foundation of your team in a productive struggle. So with that being said, building around Justin Fields and Deshaun Watson is a very nice elite threshold to be at when I'm not ready to fully go in year one. I mean, this is just a flexible position to be in as a whole. If you want to contend or rebuild, staying flexible in those first couple of rounds is going to be crucial for you.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of to that point, I mean, Kyler Murray in this room, I can pretty much already make the determination that this is a contending room because we see a bunch of running backs go off the board. Kyler Murray, who's obviously not going to help in a contending window right away because he's going to be injured, falls to me here at the 211, which is absolute smash value there. So at this point in the draft, I can pretty much already make the determination that the room is contending heavy, and I could probably even sell this pick, this 3-2, if I wanted to.
Yep.
But I mean, I also have the premier contending tight end on the board for me in Kyle Pitts. Could go with him, could go with a wide receiver. There's obviously plenty of young wide receiver talent on the board. I'm going to take Kyle Pitts here because, you know, even though we didn't specify if this was like tight end premium or not, I think Kyle Pitts at the 3-2 to go along with those two stable quarterbacks. I pretty much have those positions locked down already. I can pretty much just smash wide receivers for the next like 5 rounds, continue to trade down, collect capital if this were a real draft.
So I'm now on the clock here, and given the room, we've already seen what 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 running backs off the board, and Travis Kelce already off the board. So right off the bat, we already know that this is going to be a more contending room. And given the running backs are available, the best running backs available at the 311, I can just safely tell you I'm most likely not drafting a single running back in this 8-round format. But like we said, in a more 1-year punt productive struggle, you're typically not taking any anyway. So in a real draft, I would have already made the correct assessment that this is a 1-year punt type of team. And I would just stock up on quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends. And like you'll see right here, getting a young elite wide receiver in Chris Olave, a top 10 overall dynasty wide receiver, top 6 overall dynasty wide receiver in my rankings. More than fine with him there. T. Higgins goes off the board and Austin Eckler. Now I'm back on the clock here. And I believe my highest, Drake London is available. Smash. So I'm leaving my first 4 rounds with Fields, Watson, Olave, and London for a productive struggle. I mean, we could be looking at 4 top 24 assets by this time next year.
Yeah, exactly. And this actually would be one of the few examples where you might not have traded down from those picks because those two guys fall into you is pretty crazy value. So I'm on the board here again, back to the running back position. It's obviously pretty terrible. I already have myself a stable tight end. I have myself 2 stable quarterbacks. So looking at the quarterback position, because again, back to the one point that we were talking about, you have assets, you don't have players. Even though I already have Patrick Mahomes and Kyler Murray, that doesn't preclude me from taking a quarterback value. Had Tua Tagovailoa fall to me, I probably would have pulled the trigger on him because I think that would be great value, but I'm actually going to forego, Trey Lance, Daniel Jones type of options here. And I'm going to go over to the wide receiver position, grab myself a young wide receiver anchor in Jordan Addison and see what kind of falls back to me here. So Hawkinson and Javonte Williams go off the board. I could still go with another young wide receiver. Jerry Jeudy's highly ranked for me. Brandon Ayuk highly rated for me. Quentin Johnston also kind of fits that build with a young, upside kind of tight wide receiver there. That's actually the direction I'm going to go. Even though Quentin Johnston's, ranked a little bit behind guys like Jerry Jeudy for me in my actual rankings, given the build that I'm going with here, I'm punting, I'm, productive struggling. And actually that 5-2 pick, I probably would have traded off of as well, given that the wide receiver position was so rich with talent. I could have moved down to the mid 6th round, maybe picked up a 2024 first in a casual room and still gotten a receiver I ranked similarly.
Yep, and speaking of receivers ranked similarly, I was holding my breath that Jerry Jeudy would fall to me, and I do end up getting him here at the 511. So really, really like the start of this team. I'm just going to quickly look at in terms of a detour tight end. Nothing I want to take here. Obviously, I'm not going to take a running back. Any quarterback, I mean, Daniel Jones falling to the 602 is just ridiculous. So like you've already kind of mentioned, I have Fields and Watson. That doesn't preclude me from taking a falling Daniel Jones, a guy that I think should probably be going in the 4-5 area of startups. Him going at the 602, if he fell this far, I'm snatching up that value every time. So I'm leaving my first 6 rounds with 3 quarterbacks and 3 wide receivers, but I believe I got a value on every single one of the picks I've made.
Yeah, I will say the tricky thing with quarterbacks is sometimes you view quarterbacks higher than your league market, because if you're drafting a Daniel Jones, you don't necessarily want to just draft him and hoard quarterbacks and draft 4 or 5 of them in the first 8 picks, because sometimes your league just doesn't value quarterbacks as highly. So that's the one thing I will say about like taking the value on quarterback is you need to kind of evaluate, did this player fall, or does this league market not evaluate quarterbacks very highly? Because I would say, given the board, you could say this league market definitely does evaluate quarterbacks highly, but you don't want to just grab quarterbacks willy-nilly and just hope that you're going to trade them at some point, because sometimes it doesn't always work out that way.
That's
I'm
a great
back on the
point.
board here. I think very clearly Brandon Ayuk is my highest rated wide receiver, so I'm going to take him.
Yep.
Again, already have a tight end. I think Freiermuth is a decent value here. Quarterback-wise, could grab an upside quarterback, and I think that's actually what I'm going to do here at this point in time. Yeah, the wide receiver positions are pretty flat here. Again, this would probably be an instance where I would look at the board and see if anybody who's a contending team wanted to come up for, Kirk Cousins or maybe Kenny Pickett or Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, any of those like contending type of quarterbacks. What I'm actually going to do here is probably take Kenny Pickett, who I think is, a young quarterback, could appreciate in value. Could have gone with Will Levis as well there, but I'll take the first round draft capital over the second round draft capital.
Yep. No, I like that pick. Treylon Burks going off the board hurts me because if he were to slip to the 7-11, I would have absolutely loved life. I'm going to go with Jahan Dotson with one of these picks and hope that Team 12 doesn't take a second tight end here. So perfect. And I do get Pat Freiermuth at the 8-2. So I'm leaving my first 8 rounds in absolute love with this team, to be honest.
Yeah, look at the tight end run that you started. My goodness.
Yeah, that's remarkable.
Yeah, so I'm back on the clock here. I got a couple wide receivers that I value pretty decently. I think Deontay Johnson and Christian Kirk would be my highest 2 rated wide receivers. Running back wise, I don't really value any of these guys high enough to take over those guys at tight end. I mean, Sam Laporta is interesting, but I don't see any huge value there. Again, this would be an instance where I would look to trade off of this pick at 8-11. I do not think Russell Wilson and Geno Smith should be on the board. So I could go to, I don't know, one of these teams that's building out a contending window, like Team 12, for example, only
Team
has Jared
7.
Goff, has a very strong running back, wide receiver, and a contending tight end. There with George Kittle, I could go to Team 12 and be like, hey, give me your 9, 12 or whatever that he's going to be picking at, and a 2024 first, and I'll give you another startup pick at some point. Maybe I'll give him my 10th round pick for my 8th round. My 8th and my 10th round pick for his 9, 12, and 2024 first or something like that. At this point in the draft, it's a little bit harder to trade for future first, but I definitely would be looking to do something like that. But I probably, if I couldn't, trade down, obviously in this example, I would just grab Deontay Johnson there, who would be my highest rated wide receiver.
Yep. So overall, we're leaving our team. So I'm leaving with Fields, Watson, Olave, London, Judy, Daniel Jones, Dotson, and Freiermuth in this exercise. Corey leaving with Patrick Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Kyle Pitts, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson, Brandon Ayuk, Kenny Pickett, and Deontay Johnson. So overall, I really love the way our teams look in this video as opposed to the contending one, because I'll be honest, the sleeper ADP or algorithm in terms of mock drafting is really not on your side when you're trying to build a contending team. Whereas if you're in this type of room in a real startup, and this is how people appropriate the values, and you can walk away with either of our teams, you should be absolutely smashing every single league you guys are in with a productive struggle.
Yeah, and I think if you look back to the rules that we talked about, I think both of us were able to maintain some flexibility with our first 2 picks. We get our 2 anchor quarterbacks. We kind of understood the league market as soon as like the late second round area, where we're like, okay, these guys are taking running backs highly. They're taking Travis Kelce at 303. This is the type of league market that we would want to rebuild in. Then obviously we don't have players. We have assets comes into play. The fact that you took Daniel Jones there at the 6-2, you weren't worried about the fact that you already had 2 quarterbacks. Trade down as much as humanly possible. Again, it's a mock draft. We can't really do that, but we did talk about kind of instances where we would explore trade offers, and you definitely want to be, along with, sending, stuff in all chat being like, I want trade down offers here. You also need to be actively sending out offers yourself. And then rule number 4 comes into factor that neither of us drafted a running back. We built our team around foundational quarterbacks and tight ends.
I just quickly want to add that because I think that's a fantastic point. I've actually got a couple DMs, a couple comments saying like, Danny, like, how are you so active trading? Like, how do you make so many trades? I'm curious because when my pick's on the block, like I'll just say on the block and wait for offers, but nobody comes. Like, how do you make moves happen? You have to be proactive. People are just not going to knock down on your door and say, hey, listen, I'm willing to give you value. No, like, you got to seek it out. You got to potentially look at how other teams in your league are already looking at from the startup. Let's say hypothetically, you're 4 rounds in and you're team 9 here right now. And let's just say here, I'm at the London 402 pick. And this guy is really, really worried that Tua Tagovailoa is going to get sniped by team 10, who picks a pick before him. You engage with that guy and you see if you can get a little bit of value. Or even if you want to do it from a more extreme case, let's just say hypothetically, somebody is in love with getting another, Cooper Kupp added to their team because they're fully win now. And they're willing to give you, let's just say hypothetically, they're 5 and they're 6 for that pick. If we're equating it right now, maybe Chris Olave is a bad example because I actually value him a lot higher. But Cooper Kupp here at the 310, let's just say. somebody's operating either 5 and 6. That could end up materializing into Christian Watson and DJ Moore, or Christian Watson and Brandon Ayuk, or Jerry Jeudy and George Pickens. Like, I will take any two combo of those guys as opposed to solely Cooper Kupp. So being able to contextualize the board, being able to contextualize what your league mates' starting points are looking at in terms of trade negotiations, and understanding exactly what your equivalent value is from picks to translatable players / assets is how you're going to be able to be proactive and make a ton of moves in your startup. Or, I mean, even you can translate this to your rookie drafts as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we close out this video, let's look at a real life example, a team that I actually built late in the NFL season last year. So a lot of people, I figured because the fact there was actually a pot to be had and it was the end of the season, we already had a lot of information about what types of teams were going to be good because we knew what players were performing well for fantasy. I figured the room was going to go very competitive. Of course, they did. A lot of the players that weren't competitive were falling to me at value, and a lot of the guys that were competitive were going very highly. So in this startup draft, again, you guys can see my picks. I was able to, go Patrick Mahomes, Kyle Pitts, and a tight end premium. I thought that was great value. At the 302, I end up trading down. I believe I got like the 402 and the 511 for like the 302 and like the 702 or something like that. I can't exactly remember what the trade was, but I'm able to pocket some value. I get Garrett Wilson and Jameson Williams down here. I think at this pick right here at this 411, I sniped this guy, guy over here. I can't remember exactly where he picked this Ty Duo guy. I sniped him on Treylon Burks. He wanted him at the 412. So I grabbed Treylon Burks here. He was pissed that I sniped him. So what he offered me was his 2023 first and the 511 for that Treylon Burks pick. And I end up obviously pocketing a great pick. I get a player that was comparable for me. Jameson Williams and Treylon Burks at that time were pretty comparable. And I end up getting a pick that materialized into the 104 in the rookie draft. So I definitely built out the team that way. And then when I look at the final product, so now this is kind of what the team currently looks like. I've had the rookie draft. I know what's going on into next year, and I'm able to build out a team with Patrick Mahomes and Bryce Young as my anchor quarterbacks, Garrett Wilson, Jordan Addison, Quentin Johnson, Jahan Dotson as my main wide receivers. Zach Charbonnet ended up falling to me at value in the rookie draft, and I just didn't pass that up at the 202 there. I could always shop him at a later point in time, or I could just hold on to him because I think he's one of the few running backs that's actually not terrible in a one-year punt or a productive struggle. And then I still, of course, have Kyle Pitts to anchor my tight end core, including 4 2024 firsts, a couple extra thirds here and there. I can build out my running back core with some of these firsts, and I have upside with these running backs. AJ Dillon could be thrust into a big workload if Aaron Jones got hurt. Rashad Penny might be this year's Jamal Williams. I have Elijah Mitchell, who obviously is a high value handcuff to Christian McCaffrey. So there's a lot of upside. There's a lot of potential for this team to become a monster in the long term. And that's definitely my goal. By this time next year, I should have a team with a bunch of young receivers that are entering their prime, a bunch of young quarterbacks, including Patrick Mahomes, who's the best in the league, and then hopefully some rookie running backs to add to this running back core and maybe be in a house money season or a real contending window as soon as next year.
Yeah, no, 100%. I think you smashed that startup. I would show you guys a startup draft of my own as well, but this offseason, I actually have not done a productive struggle. But I mean, you guys have seen the numerous examples on the channel from the past. So if you want any reference, look at, one of the past my own dynasty decisions from either of us. If you want to see the exact specifics. But overall, this video is more fun, more so outlining exactly how to conduct a productive struggle. A lot of you guys have been asking exactly how we go about in terms of our startup strategy. So hopefully you guys got a lot of value from the last 2 days in terms of the contending video, as well as this productive struggle video. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever strategy you're going to employ, again, be flexible early on in your draft. And then once you decide, I'm going to go contender, I'm going to go rebuilder, go check out this video or go check out the video we did yesterday. So you guys know some rules to follow, some examples that we outlined, some of the player pockets that we're looking to target in both examples as well. That this was our #1 draft strategy video if you build a productive struggle. Yesterday's was #1 draft strategy video if you build out a contender. Hopefully you enjoyed. Leave a like if you did. Subscribe to the channel. If you're new around here, comment down below what you thought, some of your disagreements. I'm sure some people don't totally agree with everything we talked about. This wasn't really a player takes video, so I wouldn't be too focused on the players that we drafted in the mock draft. It was more kind of theories and principles and that kind of thing, which is what we do here over on the Dynasty 101 series. And of course, check out all the other Dynasty 101 videos on the playlist as well. But with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.